The morning the call came in, Detective Emma Larson knew something had shifted in the air. Nearly 15 years had passed since the disappearance of Abigail Hart, a bright and ambitious 21-year-old from the small town of Brooksville, South Dakota. For years, Abigail's case had sat dormant, buried beneath piles of untested evidence, faded memories, and whispered rumors. The town had learned to live with the uncertainty, but nothing ever erased the quiet ache in the hearts of her family. That ache was palpable in her mother's voice over the phone, trembling yet resolute as she asked Emma to review a new forensic report that hinted at breakthroughs using technology unavailable when Abigail first vanished. Emma could hear the hope behind the words, fragile but persistent, and she knew this was the moment when the shadows of the past might finally give way to truth. Abigail had been a student at the local community college, known for her infectious laughter and an unshakable sense of curiosity. She had ambitions of becoming a journalist, often staying up late to write articles for the small-town newspaper, capturing the stories of Brooksville's residents with empathy and precision. On the evening she disappeared, she had been returning from a late-night study session at the library, her backpack full of notebooks and dreams. Her car was found abandoned on the edge of a gravel road, headlights still on, the engine warm, a haunting image that the small town would never forget. Witnesses reported seeing her walking toward the darkened edge of town, but beyond that, Abigail seemed to vanish into thin air. The initial investigation had scoured every lead, interviewed friends and neighbors, and even pursued tips from neighboring towns. Yet nothing ever solidified into a clear picture of what had happened to her. New report Emma received described the application of advanced forensic imaging and DNA, phenotyping technologies that had only emerged in the last decade. A tiny trace of DNA, once thought inconclusive, had been reanalyzed using the latest software, generating new leads that hinted at an individual who had not been considered a suspect 15 years ago. Emma's heart raced as she pored over the data, recognizing familiar locations in the digital mapping of Abigail's last known movements and the subtle forensic traces that had been overlooked. Each piece of evidence added a layer of complexity to the story that the town thought it knew, revealing an intricate network of connections, hidden motives, and small-town secrets that had been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Emma convened a discreet team, bringing in both seasoned detectives and forensic specialists who had a fresh perspective on cold cases. Together, they began retracing Abigail's final hours, examining old photographs, revisiting interviews, and analyzing digital footprints that had been archived but never fully explored. Every step seemed to reveal contradictions, minor details that had been dismissed in the original investigation but now pointed to a much darker reality. A neighbor recalled a suspicious van parked near the library weeks before Abigail disappeared, a detail dismissed in the initial inquiry but now appearing to align with newly discovered evidence. Another witness remembered fleeting interactions at a local diner, moments that had seemed inconsequential then but now formed a disturbing pattern. The breakthrough came when the team focused on a small, overlooked object, a hairpin found in Abigail's abandoned car. Using advanced microscopic analysis, they discovered a partial DNA profile that matched a distant relative of a local resident who had a history of minor offenses. The connection was tenuous at first, but the genealogical software and cross-referencing databases quickly confirmed a closer familial link, narrowing the pool of potential suspects to someone in Abigail's immediate environment. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Suddenly, the case transformed from an ambiguous disappearance into a story of deception, betrayal, and concealed violence that had been simmering in plain sight. The suspect, once considered a benign figure in the community, was now at the center of scrutiny. Emma and her team meticulously reviewed old phone records, surveillance footage, and personal correspondence, piecing together a timeline that painted a chilling portrait. It became clear that Abigail had unknowingly crossed paths with someone who had been carefully monitoring her movements, someone who had skillfully manipulated circumstances to create confusion and delay detection. The sense of betrayal ran deep, magnifying the emotional impact of the case. The community, still reeling from Abigail's disappearance years earlier, now faced the horrifying reality that a trusted neighbor or acquaintance could have been responsible as the investigation advanced. Emma found herself revisiting her own initial impressions of the case. She remembered the early interviews, the family's pleading eyes, and the nagging feeling that something critical had been overlooked. The advent of new technology now allowed her to reconcile those old instincts with concrete evidence, confirming suspicions that had lingered in the shadows of her memory. Each day brought new revelations, discarded items in hidden locations, digital footprints left behind by someone who had assumed no one would ever revisit the past, and subtle discrepancies in testimonies that now gained weight in the light of advanced forensic scrutiny. The complexity of the case became almost overwhelming, yet Emma's determination only grew stronger by the end of the first week. The team had established a clear chain of evidence that directly implicated the suspect. It was a delicate moment too early to announce anything publicly, yet too significant to ignore internally. The challenge was to ensure that every step, every piece of evidence, and every connection was airtight. Emma coordinated with legal advisors to ensure that the forthcoming actions would withstand scrutiny, recognizing that a misstep could compromise the entire case. Meanwhile, the Whitman family, though unaware of the specific details, were kept informed in broad terms, their cautious optimism mirrored in every conversation and exchange. The emotional stakes were high, a mixture of hope and dread permeating the town. The initial interviews with the suspect were telling. At first, there was calm denial, a carefully crafted facade of innocence. But subtle inconsistencies soon emerged, small tremors in speech and behavior that suggested cracks in the mask. Advanced behavioral analysis, combined with the new DNA evidence, created a mounting pressure that the suspect could not ignore indefinitely. The realization that the past could not remain buried for long began to weigh heavily, as the suspect was confronted with the inevitability of exposure. For Emma, observing this shift was both professionally satisfying and personally poignant. Years of unanswered questions were finally converging toward resolution amid the mounting evidence. The town itself seemed to shift in atmosphere. Brooksville's residents, who had long internalized the uncertainty surrounding Abigail's fate, felt a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. Families whispered in hushed tones about the developments, speculating quietly while grappling with renewed fears and long-suppressed memories. Social media, local news outlets, and community forums buzzed with cautious hope, as residents contemplated the possibility that the truth, long hidden, might finally emerge. The tension was almost tangible, an unspoken acknowledgement that the smallest town could harbor secrets that, once revealed, would shake the foundations of familiarity and trust. The critical turning point came when the forensic team matched partial DNA from the hairpin and other overlooked items to a profile in the national database. This breakthrough confirmed the suspect's presence at multiple key locations, directly linking them to Abigail's last known movements. The clarity of the evidence left little room for denial, and the once obscure threads of the case now formed a cohesive, undeniable narrative. Emma felt a mixture of relief and gravity as she reviewed the final report. Relief that the technology had unlocked what had been impossible years earlier, and gravity at the implications for Abigail's family and the community that had lived with uncertainty for so long. As the first part of the investigation's culmination drew to a close, preparations began for a careful confrontation and potential arrest. Emma knew that approaching the suspect required precision, patience, and an unwavering commitment to procedural integrity. Every member of the team was acutely aware that this moment carried the weight of justice, the culmination of years of frustration, grief, and unfulfilled questions. The past and present converged in a tense stillness, a reminder that the pursuit of truth was relentless, unyielding, and ultimately transformative. The following weeks were a storm of meticulous preparation, anxiety, and quiet anticipation. Detective Emma Larson and her team worked around the clock, double-checking every lead, verifying each piece of forensic evidence, and ensuring that the story they were about to tell was airtight. The DNA matches and genealogical links had provided a strong foundation, but they needed more connections that could stand up in court, that could finally give Abigail Hart's family the justice they had waited nearly 15 years for. Every document, every witness statement, every digital footprint was scrutinized, revealing subtle patterns and long-buried secrets that painted a portrait of a carefully concealed crime. Emma often found herself staring at the timeline of Abigail's disappearance, tracing her steps again and again, trying to imagine the terror she must have felt as her life was suddenly interrupted, her bright future stolen in an instant. The suspect, a man who had blended seamlessly into the quiet rhythms of Brooksville, had maintained a low profile over the years. Friends and neighbors remembered him as unassuming, polite, and entirely unremarkable. That unremarkability had allowed him to slip through the cracks of suspicion, to be overlooked by initial investigations, and to live without consequence for years. But with the forensic evidence pointing unmistakably in his direction, every interaction with him became a delicate negotiation between strategy and revelation. Emma and her team understood that confronting him too early could allow him to cover tracks or destroy evidence. Patience was crucial. Timing could mean the difference between securing justice and letting another chapter of the case fade into frustration. Meanwhile, the Whitman family, Abigail's mother, father, and younger sister held their breath with a mixture of fear and hope. The mere mention of a breakthrough made their hearts pound, emotions swinging between cautious optimism and the gnawing dread of disappointment. For 15 years, they had carried the pain of uncertainty, memorializing birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays with the shadow of Abigail's absence looming over every event. Now, with the case reignited, the emotions they had buried deep began to surface with startling clarity. The family's resilience had been extraordinary, but nothing could have fully prepared them for the flood of feelings, triggered by the possibility of truth finally emerging. As the investigation progressed, Emma discovered more overlooked clues, each carrying the weight of years of neglect. Surveillance footage from a nearby store, once dismissed due to its grainy quality, was enhanced with new technology, revealing fleeting movements of a vehicle that correlated precisely with the suspect's known locations. Neighbors recalled minor incidents that had seemed insignificant: misplaced package, a fleeting argument, a strange visitor. But, in the context of newly uncovered evidence. These moments became pieces of a complex puzzle. The careful reassembly of these fragments illustrated a narrative that had been obscured by time, a story that finally began to make sense in chilling detail. The suspect's behavior, as the investigation closed in, became increasingly erratic. Casual conversations revealed slips, subtle inconsistencies, and a growing tension that the team interpreted as both fear and guilt. Emma observed the way he fidgeted, avoided eye contact, and sometimes froze mid-sentence, realizing that the long-sealed emotions he had buried were now threatening to surface. Every subtle behavioral cue added weight to the physical evidence, reinforcing the team's confidence that they were closing in on the truth. Yet, the detective knew that these cues alone were not enough. Concrete proof was essential for justice to be served. It was a quiet Tuesday when the final piece fell into place. A re-evaluation of Abigail's personal devices, long thought lost or irrelevant, revealed communication threads that had been overlooked in the original investigation. Hidden messages, deleted conversations, and obscure emails provided direct insight into her interactions with the suspect in the days leading up to her disappearance. The contents suggested a growing sense of unease, subtle warnings that something was amiss, yet no one had understood the significance at the time. These discoveries, combined with the DNA evidence, behavioral analysis, and reconstructed timeline, painted a chilling yet undeniable picture. Emma convened a final meeting with her team, going over every piece of evidence in painstaking detail. Every lead was cross-referenced, every hypothesis challenged, every possible alternative considered. The gravity of the case weighed heavily on all of them. They were on the precipice of a long-awaited resolution, and any misstep could jeopardize not only the investigation but also the chance for Abigail's family to finally experience closure. The team rehearsed scenarios, reviewed legal procedures, and prepared for the possibility of confrontation, ensuring that every detail was covered. The tension was tangible, the stakes immeasurable. When the arrest warrant was finally secured, the team approached the suspect with precision and care. The confrontation was calm on the surface, but beneath the measured words and procedural steps, a storm of emotions swelled. The suspect's initial reaction was shock and denial, but as evidence was presented, each piece meticulously laid out, irrefutable and clear, the facade began to crumble. Emma watched as fear, guilt, and realization flickered across his face, a complex mixture that mirrored the gravity of the years he had spent hiding from consequences. The process was methodical, emotionally charged, and yet restrained, designed to preserve the integrity of the investigation while ensuring accountability for past actions once in custody. The suspect's interactions with the investigators shifted. Denial gave way to defensive explanations. Defensive explanations gave way to reluctant admissions, and finally, the weight of undeniable evidence led to confessions. Emma, present during these sessions, felt a mixture of professional satisfaction and deep emotional resonance. The words spoken in the interrogation room unlocked years of unanswered questions, revealing the truth of Abigail's final moments and the calculated manner in which her disappearance had been orchestrated. The confession confirmed what the evidence had suggested, but carried a weight that transcended data and analysis, the human reality of trauma, loss, and the long shadow of crime in a small town. News of the arrest rippled through Brooksville with a mixture of shock, relief, and grief. Residents, many of whom had grown up alongside Abigail or remembered her disappearance vividly, felt a resurgence of emotions long dormant. The revelation that someone they had trusted could commit such a crime left the town, both shaken and strangely united in their collective response. Vigils, discussions, and support networks emerged as the community grappled with both the horror of the truth and the relief that justice was finally within reach. The Whitman family, though emotionally overwhelmed, expressed gratitude for the perseverance of law enforcement and the technological advancements that had allowed the case to be solved. As Emma reflected on the conclusion of this phase of the investigation, she recognized the interplay of persistence, technology, and human intuition. The combination of advanced forensic methods, careful behavioral analysis, and dogged detective work had transformed a cold, stagnant case into a story of revelation and accountability. The sense of justice was tempered by the recognition of the years lost, the experiences denied, and the emotional toll exacted on everyone involved. Yet, the closure offered a measure of peace, a validation of the relentless pursuit of truth, and a reminder that even the most obscure mysteries could eventually be illuminated by diligence and innovation. The town of Brooksville, once paralyzed by uncertainty, now began the process of healing. Families felt the subtle release of long-held tension, the ability to speak Abigail's name without wincing, and the opportunity to reflect on the resilience that had carried them through 15 years of unanswered questions. Schools, workplaces, and social gatherings carried the undercurrent of collective awareness, a recognition that life, while fragile and unpredictable, could ultimately be affirmed through the triumph of perseverance and justice. The unfolding of the investigation, the uncovering of long-hidden evidence, and the confrontation with the suspects served as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the power of determination and technological advancement. The courtroom was filled with a heavy, almost tangible tension as the trial began. The Whitman family sat together, hands clasped tightly, faces etched with the marks of years of grief and anticipation. For 15 long years, they had lived in a limbo of unanswered questions, haunted by the uncertainty surrounding Abigail's disappearance. Now, with the suspect in custody, the trial was more than a procedural step. It was the culmination of years of hope, fear, and relentless pursuit of truth. Every seat in the small courtroom seemed to hum with the weight of collective expectation, the air thick with the understanding that justice, delayed but not denied, was finally unfolding. The prosecution presented a meticulous case, carefully weaving together DNA evidence, forensic reconstructions, witness testimonies, and digital communications that had only recently come to light. Each piece of evidence was presented with precision, leaving little room for doubt. The genealogical DNA match that had initially sparked the breakthrough was contextualized with corroborating evidence, surveillance footage, phone records, and the suspect's own inconsistent statements. The narrative of the crime, pieced together with painstaking detail, left the jury with an undeniable understanding of what had happened to Abigail. The emotional weight of the evidence was not lost on the courtroom. Each fact carried the resonance of a life interrupted and a family forever changed. Witness after witness took the stand, their voices trembling as they recounted their memories of Abigail. The day she vanished, and the subtle signs that had been overlooked at the time. Former friends spoke of her bright personality, her laughter, and the quiet dreams she carried for the future. Neighbors recounted minor oddities, gestures, or exchanges that seemed trivial at the time but now held deep significance. Each testimony painted a picture of a young woman whose life was full of promise, making the tragedy of her loss all the more poignant. The human dimension of the case added layers of emotional depth to the cold, technical evidence, creating a compelling narrative that intertwined facts with the lived reality of those left behind. The defense, aware of the strength of the evidence against their client, attempted to introduce doubt, highlighting the passage of time and suggesting potential errors in recollection or interpretation. However, the accumulation of DNA evidence, technological reconstructions, and corroborated witness accounts proved overwhelmingly persuasive. The suspect's own inconsistencies and the eventual confession were inescapable anchors in the case, grounding the prosecution's narrative and leaving little room for alternative explanations. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the community, the family, and the justice system were aligned in seeking accountability, a resolution that had been delayed but never forgotten. Outside the courtroom, Brooksville's streets reflected the community's complex mix of relief and lingering grief. Conversations in cafes, parks, and workplaces centered around the trial, the evidence, and the eventual outcome. Residents expressed both shock and validation, grappling with the realization that someone they had trusted or, at least, regarded as harmless was capable of such a calculated act. The public attention was not sensationalized for curiosity's sake. Instead, it mirrored a community collectively processing trauma, acknowledging the weight of past mistakes, and seeking closure. For many, the trial was both a reckoning and a reassurance that justice could ultimately prevail. Even against the odds of time, the final days of the trial brought the culmination of weeks of testimony and legal argumentation. The prosecution summarized the case with clarity and emotional resonance, emphasizing the journey from Abigail's disappearance to the painstaking reconstruction of events through modern forensic science. Every DNA match, every surveillance frame, every witness recollection was woven into a coherent, compelling narrative that left the jury with a full understanding of both the facts and the human impact of the crime. The defense, having exhausted all reasonable arguments, rested quietly, acknowledging the insurmountable weight of evidence and the clarity of the prosecution's case. When the jury returned with a verdict, the tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable. Emma Larson, present as an observer and guiding force in the investigation, held her breath alongside Abigail's family. The four-person's words conviction on all counts sent a wave of emotion through the room. Relief, grief, and a profound sense of closure washed over those present. The Whitman family wept openly, releasing years of suppressed fear and sorrow. Their tears, a mixture of mourning and the quiet satisfaction that justice, long delayed, had finally been realized. The suspect, now formally held accountable, faced the consequences of his actions, a tangible affirmation of the work of law enforcement, forensic experts, and the persistence of human determination. In the weeks following the verdict, the town of Brooksville slowly began to heal. Memorials for Abigail were revisited with renewed meaning. Conversations about her life replaced the shadow of her disappearance, and the community acknowledged the resilience that had carried them through 15 years of uncertainty. For Emma Larson and her team, the closure was professional and deeply personal, testament to the power of persistence, technological advancement, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. They understood that their work had restored not just justice, but dignity to a family and a town long burdened by unanswered questions. Reflecting on the journey, it was evident that solving Abigail's case had required more than modern science. It had demanded empathy, intuition, patience, and a relentless refusal to accept that the passage of time could obscure the truth. The interplay of DNA evidence, behavioral analysis, witness recollection, and the careful piecing together of historical details illustrated a multidimensional approach to justice. Each breakthrough, every minor clue, technological enhancement, and overlooked testimony was a vital thread in a tapestry that ultimately revealed the full story. The emotional resonance of the case lingered long after the trial ended. Abigail's memory became a symbol of perseverance, both for her family and for the community. The lessons learned the importance of attention to detail, the need for compassion in investigative work, and the undeniable power of truth would inform future cases and serve as a reminder that even the most complex and seemingly hopeless investigations could reach resolution. Justice, while delayed, had arrived in its most complete and meaningful form, offering a measure of peace to those who had endured years of uncertainty and fear. For the Whitman family, life would never be the same. Yet there was a newfound ability to move forward without the constant shadow of unanswered questions. Abigail's story, once a haunting void, had been filled with truth, clarity, and accountability. The town of Brooksville, shaped by the collective trauma and eventual resolution, emerged with a renewed sense of community and awareness. And for those who had labored so long to uncover the truth, the case stood as a testament to the enduring value of diligence, innovation, and unwavering commitment to justice.